It's 18 to 8.
Well, Nash votes on its leadership tomorrow, and one of the contenders is Judith Collins, who joins me now in the Auckland studio. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Guy.
Just talking there about Winston Peters, who is a shareholding minister in Air New Zealand, and expressed some distaste that the company, which is majority state-owned, may be paying for Barack Obama and may be paying handsomely to bring him out. What do you think of the minister getting involved in that manner?
Well, he's breaching all conventions. The governance issue around the Air New Zealand is for the board and the management for the management, not for Winston Peters, who is definitely no expert on companies nor their finances, but it breaches all the rules of the stock exchange. So I would suggest that it's more to do with a personal animosity towards John Key, who's now on the board of Air New Zealand in a senior role, than it is anything else.
It's not an issue that National's got into so far. Are National doing opposition very well at the moment?
Well, I think at the moment we're slightly distracted on ourselves, which is unfortunate, but that's what happens. But I do think that opposition is the time to actually oppose. It's called opposition for a reason, Guy, and it's not there because we're just all sitting around waiting to come into government. There is no entitlement to be in government, whether you're the National Party or any other party, and we have to hold this government to account, and it seems to me here's an opportunity for us to do exactly that.
Do you fear that some of your colleagues aren't in the same mindset?
Well, I think I know I'm the only one of the 5 contenders who's ever been in opposition before, and that is, I think, quite extraordinary when you consider that we had 9 years of government. I'm the only one, and I was there for 6 years in opposition, and people do tell me I was quite effective in that role.
You have another unique feature this morning. Do you know what it is?
I've turned up.
You've turned up.
Yeah.
We asked all 5 contenders this morning, but you're the only one here.
Well, I think it is part of the role of Leader of the Opposition is to take every single media opportunity, and I've been doing that in the last 2 weeks for that very reason. I viewed this as an audition for the job and to show people in my caucus what I can do in opposition, and I think that's what we really need to do. So we can't just, I think, pick and choose when you're in opposition. You do what you have to, and you do every single thing.
They didn't want to debate you.
Oh, well, there we go. I'm sure that they did. But look, it's trying to make everything work, and we had a very tight schedule this morning, and you just better make it work.
Yeah, okay. A couple of things in the news at the moment, and they relate to you in some ways. And let's start with them. 2 of them in the justice area, if you like. Firstly, prisons, and then I want to move on to lawyers and what's been happening in law firms. Yeah, because you were a lawyer.
I was. I still have a practicing certificate.
Okay. Let's
20 years as a lawyer.
All right, let's start with prisons.
Yeah.
Burgeoning prison population. One of the big items on the agenda at Cabinet at the moment is, do they fund this new $1 billion mega prison?
Yes.
What do you think? We need a new prison?
Well, I got the funding for that when I was Minister of Corrections last time, about 2 years ago.
Is that a triumph or a failure?
That is actually, well... What is the failure is people committing the crimes in the first place. But we'd much rather be able to get people into rehab and do whatever we can there. But the major blowout, you could call it that, in the prison population is around the fact that it is now much harder to get bail if you are a family violence offender or you've been accused of it or you have a previous record of family violence and also methamphetamine selling. So It's the violent sexual offences, but particularly family violence. It's all after the Christie's Law situation. We put that bill through in 2013. I was the Minister of Justice. Andrew Little, who has been talking about it, he voted for it, as did the whole of the Labour Party.
He did.
They did it for a reason, and that's because there are too many violent offences being undertaken by people who are on bail for guess what violent offences, and particularly in the family violence area. And any of us who knows anything about family violence, it's a repeat. There's never ever one instance of family violence. It happens over and over again, and women in particular were actually being pushed into withdrawing their statements from police, not proceeding with prosecutions, and actually the violence just gets worse. So we're either serious about it or not.
Well, Labour's talking about reducing the prison population by 30%. Do you think that that's doable or even desirable?
Well, the only way I believe it is desirable is if people commit fewer of these serious violent offences. And what we're seeing is there are now fewer serious offences, and that's partly, I think, because of recidivists being in jail, but also because of the big efforts we've made around rehabilitation, and particularly on drug and alcohol, and also the mental health programs I put in when I was the Minister.
All right. Let's talk about the behaviour in New Zealand law firms. There's been a lot of media scrutiny on that and the treatment of often young women. What's your take?
Well, my take is that this does happen. And my take is that as a young woman working in big law firms, is that I was always very aware to stand up for myself and to not be in situations where people might feel that they could try and take some advantage.
Did you see that happen?
I certainly never saw anything like that, but there were times when I had to be very blunt. As you would expect me to be, Guyan. I mean, I come from a farm, and if I want someone to stop some behaviour, I will be pretty jolly blunt, and that's the best way to deal with it. But look,
is there a culture problem?
I think there's a culture of entitlement in some of these big firms, and I certainly much preferred being in smaller firms, which is much friendlier, and it's more of a flat structure as such. So, but I also think that some of the big firms have made huge efforts to stamp out this behaviour. And the last big firm I was with, Minter Ellison, I certainly never saw anything like that.
Okay. More broadly on the National Party, just to finish this interview, are you a right-wing politician?
I think I'm a centre-right. I represent, I believe, the views of most national voters. And I actually think that that's really important.
Has National moved too far to the left?
I think in some cases we have, and it's primarily around the fact that we've had coalition partners, and every time we've done a deal with them, we've made concessions and we haven't come back to our core.
Does that stack up? One of your coalition partners was to the right of you, that was ACT. But It's an interesting statement. You acknowledged just then that National had moved too far to the left in some areas.
Some things.
Now name them. What are they?
Well, one of them is in the RMA. I thought that some of the really good RMA reforms that we made were overshadowed by the deal that had to be done with the Maori Party for those reforms.
What other areas that have you moved too far to the left on?
Well, I just think that there's for instance, the health and safety legislation, which I actually study health and safety as part of my my continuing education because I love to learn. But I think that some of the changes that we made are probably really harsh on small business and actually haven't led to any better outcomes for the workers. So I think we've got to be very much more focused on not just agreeing to everything that we've ever done, trying to defend everything we've done, but actually looking to see what we can do better.
So you'd move National to the right?
I would move National, I think, back to the centre-right, which is what we're supposed to be.
Are you going to win tomorrow?
We'll see. I think, Guyan, look, anything's possible when you come to...
You got some odds for me?
No, I'm not going to do that. I only ever bet if I get on a horse or something, if I get a really good feeling about the name. And I've got someone like Sir Patrick Hogan telling me it sounds like a good idea. I think it's important to understand the progressive voting system is anything can happen. And I do know that whoever is chosen will, whether it's me or anyone, will have a tough time because Leader of the Opposition, as you know, is the toughest job in Parliament. And anyone who thinks it's a cakewalk is dreaming.
Are you the toughest politician in Parliament?
Well, I hope not. I think I was the most firm. I think you've got to be tough and you've got to be resilient and you've also got to be ready for anything thrown at you. And, you can say anything like about me, but I tell you what, I always stand up.
Thanks for joining us. Well, you have this morning. Judith Collins, the only one to accept our invitation for a 5-way debate here on Morning Report for ahead of the National Party leadership tomorrow. They're voting. What time is it? 10:30 or something? Not now. 10:30. I know what time it is now. It's 10 to 8. 10:30 tomorrow.
We'll see.
Thanks for your time. Judith Collins, 9 minutes to 8 now.
Well, Trade Me is putting tougher rules in place around the sale of bees and beehives on its site to make sure people are complying with the law. Last month, RNZ reported on growing concerns among the beekeeping community that the lack of regulation on the online auction site could be putting the bee population at risk. Sarah Robson has the story.
By law, beekeepers and their hives must be registered to keep track of and control the spread of pests and diseases that could decimate the bee population. When people are selling bees, they must be